Welcome to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. My name is Dave Deacon. I'm the guy that asks the questions, turns the knobs, and basically referees the conversation between some of the most talented, enlightened, and charismatic researchers in the areas of soils and crops in the Southern Great Plains. I wonder which one of the guys wrote that. Anyway, we're going to talk about what's happening in the world of crops and soils and whatever else Oklahoma producers should be thinking about when it comes to getting the most out of their land. And if you'd like to join the conversation, send us an email at podcast@reddirtagronomy.com. It's an easy enough one to remember. Or tweet us. Our handle is reddirtag. reddirtag. That is our Twitter handle. So let's dive in feet first into the conversation by learning a little bit about the guys. Now, we're going to start off with an introduction of Dr. Brian Arnell.
All right, so Brian Arnell, Precision Nutrient Management Extension Specialist with Oklahoma State. So my focus is on majority of the crops in Oklahoma that receive some form of fertilizer and the way we manage that fertilizer with technology or lack of technology.
Mm-hmm. And so you want to introduce your friend? We're kind of trying this a different way. You know, we're just going to go round robin here. So
I'll bring in Jason Warren, who I've got about 15 days more seniority at OSU than. So never.
And so, Jason, tell us about yourself.
I'm a soil and water conservation extension specialist. So I do a little irrigation work and then work in soil health and greenhouse gas emissions and interactions with agriculture, as well as working on things to try to improve our soil water use and minimize erosion and things like that.
Well, and that's kind of evolved over the years because I mean, it started out when I first met you 13 years ago. It was, you know, we're talking about ways to irrigate, but really your job has really expanded over the years.
Yeah, the beauty of my job description is I can do anything in soils outside of nutrient management and soil fertility, and I can do that if it impacts, our water or water resources or soil resources. So I can pretty much do anything I want, but most of what I do is irrigation, and then we worked a lot with no-till management, and then trying to better understand how we want to manage soils to improve their health and sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, but it's cool because you've gone from. I remember you did carbon sequestration, the carbon market over 10 years ago. You went through the nitrous almost 10 years ago with Tracy, and then moved through, and now all that world is right back, and you're getting to do carbon and nitrous all over again.
Yeah, my first talk as a state specialist was about carbon sequestration in 2008.
Wow!
And then we're back to it, hot and heavy.
So, do you use the same PowerPoints?
No, I don't know if they've improved any, but they're a little different.
Altered logo.
Yeah. That's right. The altered logo.
And then your friend next to you.
This is my good friend Josh Lofton, who's our cropping system specialist.
Josh?
Yeah, so cropping system specialists handle agronomic production for most crops in the state, with the exception of wheat and cotton. But although we've spent a bulk majority of our time in soybeans and grain sorghum, because that's, the demand outside the other two crops that we don't work in. So, but we do dabble in other crops, mainly focus on production practice and or how those production practices are altered with varying IPM, soil fertility. The good thing is that I just get to rely on everybody around me to have their expertise, and I just kind of fill in where necessary. And we work a decent amount in cover crops as well. Just Jason does the soil side of it, and I'll do the production and the growth and the management side of it. So we'll kind of get along in that way.
Well, and you are really just the big picture. I mean, the building an actual system into whatever you're wanting to produce there, because while you can do just crop after crop, it's good to cycle through the different ones, and there's benefits to that.
Yeah, and really it's based on kind of how you see the system. I'm compared to my predecessor, which was very, Chad Gotze was here before I was here. He was very big picture. I'm probably not as big picture as Chad was. Chad was all about, he came from a production background. He grew up on a farm, so he was always looking 2 and 3 steps ahead. We look a lot at that interchange, like what this crop does to affect the next crop, not necessarily, maybe as much 2 and 3 crops down the road, which is a lot what Chad used to do. So, but I mean, questions have changed. Back in the early 2000s, we had a lot of questions about how to make the right crop rotation, and I think the growers that really want crop rotation have made that work, or the markets have made it work, depending on. And the question is now is, how do I manage those crops more effectively within that crop rotation? And that's kind of where we focus on. And you can see that a lot when the predominant thing that we look at is double crop systems. So it's how do we transition from wheat to a various other crop, and how we manage that differently than our other crop, and those kind of things. So it still has that system-based approach to it, but it's this title of this job has changed a lot, in the 2 and 3 people that have had it since the 70s or 80s.
Right.
So.
Which is pretty amazing that only 2 or 3 people have had that, position.
Well, one of those was the great general Ron Scholler. So,
right. Exactly. Well, and we'll actually dive into several of those crops throughout the process of the podcast. But today we are going to focus on. Let's just start out basic in the Oklahoma weather, because it really does change. But then it doesn't change. I mean, we get the rain, but then we go back into a dry spell, and then we live there for a while, and then we get a little bit of rain. And I've heard it said several times, we get 11 months of drought and 1 month of rain. So where are we right now whenever it comes to the Oklahoma weather picture?
Well, the big picture right now is like I'm looking at the mesonet, and out in the far reaches, the western part of the Panhandle, they went 170 days without a rain greater than a quarter inch, and that pretty much. And then western Oklahoma, you're looking at 125 to 100 days in the western tier counties, the body of the state, and pretty much that's west of I-35. You got a few pockets where they've had a quarter inch of rain in the last, or like 40 days ago, but a quarter inch of rain is not much, and and so that's where we're at. We're dry in the western half, where a lot of our cropland is, and it's been that way for a while. Ever since July, we've been kind of thin on rain.
And with that, I mean, we haven't seen rain, but then you go down in the soil, different depths in there, and there are a variety of soil moisture available to the plants. And just because it is dry at the surface doesn't mean that there's not a little bit of moisture down there.
Yeah, and that depends a lot on like your crop rotation. Those guys in the Panhandle, I'd say a lot of that ground is pretty dry, but, and they use a fallow program to let it accumulate moisture, and they may accumulated some, but if they have, it's deep in the ground. And same thing with our wheat acres. Our wheat acres accumulated some moisture most likely back in June and July. And then we had a few rains to get it established, but the top foot or so, or where the roots are growing, is probably pretty dry, and we need some rains to connect all that profile up to make us some grain on continuous wheat. And then if we had summer crops out last year, and we're going back into wheat, this past fall, those profiles are likely pretty dry because those summer crops finished off in a fairly dry condition in July or late July, August, and September, and we haven't had much rain since. We had enough to get the wheat out of the ground, but that's about it.
Well, and as we're recording this in the middle of February, there is forecasted rain, just not always in the spots that need it the most. But like my grandpa always said, pray for rain and don't complain about the mud. And that's kind of what we do in Oklahoma. So how has the production practices, the attitude of producers changed towards using preparing for drier times like this? Are the producers still planning on it being dry and then, hey, we caught a good rain, or are we just going,
That's a good question. I mean, most of us here are old enough to remember the droughts of 2009 to 2012, and the guys out west are very, very aware of that. But since then, we've had some of the best production years on record. I mean, you're looking at years that have been extremely productive. And when the challenge is now you're looking at something and hopefully we have some memory of it. But on top of being dry, we have extremely high input prices and fairly high grain prices as far as if we can make yields, we can make money. But if we don't have rain, we're not going to make those yields. And so it's one of those things where you've got to really think about how to manage your costs and risk of failure and what you're going to do if that occurs.
Right. And Brian, he talked about the input prices in there. It's been we've seen some ups and downs whenever it comes to mostly ups whenever it comes to input prices. Where are we at with that?
Well, the input price, and so for the last 6 to 7 months, I've always paid attention to fertilizer price, but it's been more pay attention to the price at the co-op or the price local. Last 6 months, I've been actually paying a lot more attention to the international market, to the price at the port in Neola, and all that stuff coming through there. And it's just been absolutely insane as the market goes. Not even looking in the future, but I follow a guy on Twitter, Josh Linville, and he does a great job of lining out what's happening internationally. And there was about a 1 month or a 45-day period where the price of urea at the port had a $500 swing up and down. So it wasn't just like going up. It was it drops 500 one day, it goes up 300, drops 200, goes up 400. And it was just this back and forth swing. I think it's about a 1 month period around the end of December to early January that this price fluctuation at the market. So, we've had all these things line up. We had COVID shutting down stuff. We had the freeze in Texas, which really hurt us on the natural gas production and availability. Had transportation issues, still maintaining transportation issues of transporting it in. A lot of our nitrogen's not produced in the U.S. right now. We got a fair amount produced here, but boy, we get a lot of urea in from the ports, both the Texas ports, the Gulf ports and the California ports, and we're just not getting it in at the same level. We have more excess, and then we have this whole thing. It was already bad in the EU and Russia and stuff as far as fertilizer price because they're escalating cost of natural gas. That was their kick, is that natural gas price. And so now with this whole Russia and Ukraine thing that's liable to go down, or by the time this comes out may have already gone through. It's not just that Russia produces the nitrogen, it's that Russia also supplies a significant amount of the natural gas for the other countries that do produce the nitrogen. So it's actually the expected impact is not the cost of nitrogen coming out of Russia. It's that the plants in the EU that are producing nitrogen are getting their natural gas from Russia. And so we're all watching that marketplace. Now, when that hits, it's not going to be an immediate. Like, we're not going to go to the co-op the day after it happens and see a $200 swing, but because we have had production, so now we've got a little bit cheaper or lower cost product you're going to see coming into ports, going into co-ops, and having that price swing. But they also have to look at the future and what they're purchasing, what they're selling. They still have a really expensive product they probably have to get out if they had it, and so unfortunately, nothing in the forecasted future looks fantastic for fertilizer prices. They are opening up. If we look at P&K, the phos stuff, those mines are operating, and so they're kind of back up to staff. The potassium stuff, we lost some significant mines or challenges with significant mines up in Canada, and we're looking at the overseas mines are still producing, and so they're opening new mines up north. They're bringing back on production scale some mines that were underproducing compared to old cost, and they're putting down new shafts. So one of the things up in Canada, one of the major mining areas up in Canada is on an old oceanic bed, and they actually go through. So the mines are about a mile deep. And right now, the mile face is about anywhere between 4 and 7 miles from the main shaft. So you drop down and you drive for anywhere between 30 minutes to 45 minutes to get to the mine face. And then all that product is still coming back. Well, they were 4 or 5 years ago, they were already getting to a point where it's taking so long to get to that mine face. They were losing time transporting people and product. And so they were starting to develop a new shaft. But these shafts, you've got a shaft for the people and a shaft for the product. But the deal is about halfway down, they're going through an underground aquifer. And so they actually have to freeze a zone that's about 30 meters to 40 meters thick that's basically an underground ocean.
Wow.
They developed some leaks, and so that they were starting to get leaks. And so you have a underground salt mine that has moisture, and that's not good. And so they've closed that. And I don't know where they're at, but they're trying to get back into that region. That mine's operating again. I think they got the leaks, but they're now under the process of putting down a new shaft in another part. But all these things came in. Arizona mines were having a problem with getting people to run, actually just manpower with COVID and then machines going down. And so those seem to be leveling out. I'm not going to say that it's going to be any cheaper, but we're hoping that we don't see any price spikes.
Didn't you say at one point in time it was also them losing like institutional knowledge as well of the people that knew how to run the machines are gone, and so that's not something that comes back online quickly is training people how to use this very specialized equipment.
No, yeah, that's what I was hearing. So this would have been last summer through the fall. One of the original reasons for price spikes in the potash market, not the only, so we had COVID. But when COVID hit, so many of these companies had to lay off or put off people. So they had laid off or I can't remember the term.
Furloughed.
Huh? Furloughed, yeah, that's right. So they furloughed about 70% of their employees, the mine employees, with expectations when they were able to bring them back, they would bring back the majority of them, at least 50% of those that went. And so it ended up where almost all of their senior, their established workers, their engineers, their miners and stuff never came back. And so it probably wasn't to that degree, but what I was told is you had folks that had been working in the mines for 7 months training new employees, and when a machine would go down that's a 40-year-old machine or a 20-year-old machine, you didn't have that institutional knowledge about how to fix it. And so instead of having machines down a day, machines are down a month. And just creating that backlog, and it goes to the institutional knowledge that Josh was saying, is that there's just nobody was there because they lost that manpower.
So I want to jump back to the nitrogen. We used to produce a lot of nitrogen in the U.S. So what was the left turn in that? Where did things turn?
Well, so we still produce a lot of nitrogen,
right?
And one of the challenges with that production of nitrogen is you have the production that's in the Central Plains and those regions.
Right.
A lot of that gas went to Texas, but even when it came back online, we produced a lot in the Southeast, and Ida wiped out a lot of that production. So Ida was another one of those things that came in, and I don't know how many plants we lost when Ida. I know at least 2 significant plants, and so we're still producing, but it's just the magnitude of product. And if you got to think about it, it's just like on the phosphorus side, is we could produce a lot of phosphorus down in the Gulf, but it's a lot cheaper to produce it overseas where they don't have to have the same environmental regulation. And so now, if you look at the nitrogen plants overseas, they may not have the same regulation and costs that they do here. So you can still produce really cheap nitrogen in Russia and Africa and get it over here. You can barge that sucker all the way over, and it hits the port at a cheaper price than maybe what CF Industries or Coke is producing here.
When in your crystal ball, when do you think we will be back to normal production of all of those NP and K?
So I, like I've said a long time ago, I am not Kim Anderson, so I do not like this market forecast. But just talking to the industry folks, whether it's CF Industries, Coke, or hearing what Josh Linville has on the international scale, is they're talking 2023 before some of the stuff settles.
Wow.
I mean, we're everybody expects at some point we start coming down.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be extremely cheap again for a while. We're not going to be, before this we were down to, and you could get anhydrous at 30 cents a pound of N at times. I mean, we were still dropping in low. I would not expect to see 30-cent nitrogen in another year or two.
So really we're maybe halfway through this.
Yeah.
Maybe. Wow. Okay.
Well, but you also have to think of, like, a lot of the things that caused this were unforeseen things that happened in 2021, like the canal over in the Middle East, the ice storm that happened down in Texas, the hurricanes and stuff like that. So I mean, it's theoretically we're halfway through this. We could be just in the front quarter, depending on what happens
next. Yeah.
Now and then. So that's the thing, is that it's one of those, you don't want to be the doomsdayer of bad news, but to predict that nitrogen is going to go back to what you would consider status quo in the next couple of years would probably be a bad thing to start planning for.
I think we would all say right now is that it's a consensus is that we need to have a 2 to 3 year plan when we're doing our marketing and our budgeting plan in the next 2 to 3 years, that we go in at high, across the board, high input costs. I don't know see how we could say otherwise. Jason?
Yeah, I don't see how you could say otherwise. It's brutal. I mean, the only saving grace is that the commodity prices are fairly high, and that's another nerve-wracking deal, is you don't know when those could fall. But I don't know, everything's high. And we see this over the years, and you think, well, we can make a lot of money if the commodity prices are high. Years ago, there was a period of time I remember when cattle markets went up.
Oh, yeah.
And, my dad, he was like, I'd just as soon have 70-cent cattle as I would $2.50 cattle, as long as my input prices are low,
right?
Because my risk's not so high,
right?
And that's where we're at. Is that there's the opportunity, but then the risk is just elevated.
Well, and that's a big thing for Oklahoma, because the risk reward structure is the same across the United States, theoretically, hypothetically speaking, but the risk of failure in the Southern Great Plains is significantly higher than it is, let's say, in the Southeast. To where at least what they're working with is, maybe a little too much rain, maybe a hurricane, maybe a pest outbreak. We sit here, and it's kind of like I tell growers every year, is that you have to plan for July hitting every single year, because we can't miss July, not that I'm aware of, in any year. So the hot and dry conditions, 100-degree weather, the likelihood of 3 or 4 weeks without rain is coming. If we miss it one year like this last year, which we had a great July, but that was just August and September and until now. But but those 100-degree weathers during the summer, at least those 100-degree weathers in multiple weeks with no appreciable moisture is coming. So yeah, that's a good point to make, is that we would almost rather more conservative prices for commodities, as long as inputs follow those same trends, because the input costs and the risk of failure in Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas is just significantly higher than it is other places.
Now, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, I've had the opportunity to work up in the Corn Belt, up in Iowa, it's a different crop, it's a different set of expectations, but they have a little bit more. I don't know. They just know that it's going to work out. Well, I told them I was from Oklahoma, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, how do you guys do agriculture down there? It's so hot. It's such extremes. It really is, but in many ways, we find a way to do it down here in Oklahoma. It takes a little bit more nail biting, but we make it work. How has what are you seeing in the crops whenever it comes to maybe some of the better crops that you've seen over the past year?
I mean, you're rolling your dice on it. I mean,
Yeah.
we theoretically, because of the nitrogen cost and all that last summer, we went to a lot of beans. Well,
Right.
bean prices were really high, nitrogen prices were really high. Corn kind of stung us in the butt the last 2 years, so we went to beans,
Right.
and a lot of milo, and the milo turned out fine. The beans, because of August and September and them just being a little bit more sensitive during those later stages to drought and to really high temperatures, then they came back and bit us. So you talk to some folks around the state right now, and beans are still going to be a preferred commodity, but there's a lot more caution being placed on them in these, and you have to specify it's in these counties that traditionally or historically in Oklahoma weren't bean producing counties.
Right.
So we're not talking like our K counties,
Right.
Wagner counties. We're not talking about that central. We're talking more the northwest or middle to south central Oklahoma, which are traditionally not bean producing counties that have grown a decent number of beans in the last couple of years. That's still a big question mark, and when you ask them what the alternative is, it's I don't know,
Right.
because I can almost not afford to grow corn.
Right.
I can almost not afford to grow milo. I can maybe grow cotton. I need forage though. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a battle of no right. The unfortunate thing is in Oklahoma, and Dave, me and you have talked about this, is some years there's no right decision.
Right.
There's a lot of right decisions. This year there's almost no right decision. There's a lot of wrong options, and depending on what we get in the next several months, could be a lot of wrong options. But I've talked to a lot of growers about just diversifying this year, getting a lot out and not a lot of anything.
Right.
If you need forage, get your forage out. If you need to make some money, you want to throw some money at soybean, know that you're going to need to put money, and the input costs are going to be high. Herbicide costs are going to be high. Insecticide costs are going to be high. Seed costs are going to be high. But, don't just sell out to any one
Right.
thing, though. This is going back to the old system in Oklahoma that we can't just sell out to a single crop. And, having a little bit of cotton acres, a little bit of bean acres, a little bit of milo, a little bit of corn, and then having your forage sorghum or your millets or sorghum sedan over here to get you a hay. That way you can get through maybe next winter might be your best option this year.
I think diversification is got to be key, and going broad. I mean, everything in the book can be thrown at this. Keeping some wheat, maybe terminating some wheat, going in, getting some moisture, diversifying might be an option. And then also on the backside, when you diversify and find that winner, not get mad because you didn't have everything in that
Right.
one winner.
Yeah.
Because maybe you wouldn't have chosen that winner. You would have chosen a loser if you went in all one. But I mean, Warren, you're up there. You run a quarter or something. How does diversification look when you're trying to do it on the farm scale in Grant County?
Well, I mean, diversification has a lot of benefits. And one of the things, like when we were looking at weather like this, is years ago I did some analysis of some data, and generally we don't fail everything. We can have a really hard wheat year, and we can have a really hard bean year, but somewhere in there we're going to get a little rain that's going to benefit one crop. So if we can have a variety of crops, that helps. At least you might be able to take advantage of the rain that we get because of its timeliness for a specific crop. The question is which crop that's going to be, and that's like what Brian said, is the best thing to do is to be diversified in the number of crops and in when you're planting them, and try to do the best you can to manage those crops accordingly. But yeah, and as far as like my deal, it's tough right now. I've got wheat. The wheat looks good. It looks okay, but only because it's got corn stalks that caught snow from a mile and a half worth of cultivated wheat north of there.
Right.
And so, but then as far as this summer and this spring, I'm still not quite sure what I would do. And you know, a lot of farmers are not that way because they're big enough where they've got stuff already set in place. They already kind of know what they're going to do as far as planting this summer.
So really, I mean,
spring.
it's like going to the roulette table. You're just putting a little bit of money on all the different numbers and waiting for the wheel to go. I mean,
yeah.
Well,
I mean, that's got to be
on a year like this. It's because we're looking down the barrel right now at planting. I mean, it's mid-February.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're a month from making, I would say making some planting decisions, but we probably already should have made some of those. But we're making some real planting. We're talking mid-March is a month away, and we're really going to have to make some movement into planting decisions, not just start, sitting in the shop making those decisions. So the question I have for Jason is what does this next month need to look like for, if I pull the trigger on, let's say, early planted corn or milo, what does this next month have to look? Does it just need to go back to normal, or do we need to be exponentially above normal?
From a soil moisture standpoint, we need to be above normal in the next 30 days to get back where we're at. I was out taking soil samples last week, and you could find some profile that was pretty good as far as soil moisture. But a lot of these like soils that have our heavier clay loams at depth, and they're beautiful, beautiful soils because they can give up a lot of water during the optimum or the rapid water demands during reproductive growth for corn or milo or whatever, and those clays are dry. And so we need moderate rates of rain that won't run off and it can accumulate and infiltrate into those soils to give us that recharge. Because a lot of these, like corn, for instance, you plant corn 25th, 30th of March, and it's gonna live pretty good on a couple feet of moisture. But once it starts to tassel in June, we've got to have a decent profile there to get it through that period of time, because our rainy season is from April to June. And then we need to be able to finish off that grain in July with the expectation of very limited rainfall and or moderate rainfall with high heat and evapotranspiration. So we got to have those profiles. But that's just the ideal. If we can get some rain to recharge that profile now, but we can get that rain through the month of April and into May when that crop is small, and get rainfalls that are in excess of our transpiration. So, that's where you're at. You drive across the state and you see guys that have already strip-tilled things and probably put fertilizer in the ground. Some of that's probably going to go to corn, and they've got to pull the trigger because of timing issues. There's no way around it. And the quicker you can get in the ground and get it done before the heat of the true summer in late July, the better off you are as far as corn is.
And that's kind of what we've talked about this year is me and you have had conversations about this is a year to be early, and it's one of those things of it's rough because right now we don't look really great. We don't have really great planting conditions out, but if we do get those timely rains, you want it to be growing in those cooler, potentially wetter conditions early than you do throwing it out to the wolves. With July right around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, and most guys, when I first started here, it's kind of been, our tenure here, Brian and I, we've seen a tremendous amount of change. When I grew up in Western Oklahoma, went to school, left Oklahoma in 2001, and there was pretty much all wheat. You had, irrigated corn, and you had cotton down the south and things like that. and then I came back, and people are growing corn and milo and beans in north central Oklahoma and all around. And then we've just seen a transition and really a gain in the productivity of all these systems. And it's through adjustments. And one adjustment is planting early on corn. Milo, guys historically would always want to plant milo in June. And I think that's just a historical deal. We've been growing milo for 100 years in Oklahoma. Same thing with cotton. And you always want to plant in June so the soil's nice and warm. But your milo particularly is very much better planted very early. And I personally would rather fight soil temperatures than fight August heat as far as like minimum soil temperature for germination. And so I like to plant milo early. One thing I've never figured out, and I don't grow a lot of beans, is like planting early beans versus like May and July beans. But the water deal is actually pretty good for either April or June beans. It kind of depends on when the rain's going to fall, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've seen the further west you go, the better the double crop goes, because you especially don't want moisture really early, really high on beans, because it'll happen. And I think that's why the beans took a bigger hit last year, is because they got so big and they looked so beautiful and they had so much leaf matter to it that when August hit and it just stopped raining, it got 100 degrees, we could not sustain that much biomass that we'd grown through. Even our double crops looked really good and really tall, and double crop beans aren't supposed to be tall, and these were tall.
Yeah, I had some 30-inch row double crop up
and canopied.
And it was just canopied over, just beautiful, huge, and we ended up with 12 bushel.
And that's the back and forth, and I'll even step back and say on milo as well, but less on milo because we do play around with a little bit lower seeding rate than we do on beans. But a really cool, wet spring and get this really good growth might look really good on beans, but if we have a prolonged dry spell like we did last year, it does some. That's why our double crop, the further west you go, is always done better on beans, because it grows a little bit slower, grows a little bit smaller, but then it doesn't have as much to sustain itself whenever August heat comes.
Well, I've seen the same thing years ago, Josh, even before this, and might have been before. We did a lot of starter work and early fertility work on beans. And there was 5 years in a row where I knew in the combine going through. So in the season, a lot of the fertility work, we got big beans, rowed over, viney, and those little compact rows that I was cutting would be 50, 60, 70 bushel. But anything that was taller and vined over, I'd lost 15, 20 bushel out of it.
Well, and I always think that the one of the best things for double crop beans particularly is it makes growers do no-till, because they don't have time to till. They don't, most of them don't burn still yet, which is probably good for the most part. And it's like it makes it do no-till, and beans just do so much better with residue out in the field, and just having that stuff to, like you said, capture these rains and lower the runoff events. It just does. It's a forced hand, and it's a good forced hand. So there's a catch, I guess, Dave, when we talk about planting early. Our corn and milo, this is potentially a year to go really early, but beans is one of those you have to question, is that late April your best time, or are we going to roll the dice? And I would say roll the dice, but it's almost not, because I'm going to look and see what June brings. And if it's like last year, maybe I don't pull the trigger and I don't have a crop, but maybe I put a hay out then at that point. And that's a good thing. I think that's a decision tree, if you will, or a stance that a lot of growers should have this year is, let's not, I don't want to say let's not rush, but let's roll with the punches. This is the year to be true Southern Great Plains folks, growers that have lived through everything. You talk to those growers out in the Panhandle, they say it all the time. We just plant what Mother Nature tells us to, and we have to kind of roll this year with the punches of saying, hey, I know I booked a lot of beans, but if it doesn't rain, I might need to think of alternative options here.
Are there, when it comes to options, are there more moisture efficient options, say, soybeans versus sesame versus this crop versus this crop? Is there one out there that does better with a drought condition?
With drought conditions, probably none of them do great.
Right.
If I were to have a crop out there that was going into a drought, I'd like to have, if you want a broadleaf, I'd like to have some cotton out there because it can sustain it. But cotton still needs a good amount of water.
Yeah.
I'd love to have milo out there. Sesame's okay, but there's some herbicide options in a lot of our fields that have taken a hit or a slide on herbicides the last couple of years. There's just not beans and corn and cotton have a means to snap back those weeds. And things like milo and sesame just don't have a whole lot of, if you have some escapes, they don't have a whole lot of options to come back around. So hopefully milo in the next couple of years will have that, but I don't know how much of that will be available this year. But for the most part, if I'm hot, I'd like to have some cotton out there.
Right.
If I'm hot and dry, I'd probably rather have like a milo out there. Or
is it something though you'd rather an option that you could either, if it doesn't pan out for grain, that you at least have a forage you can chop it for forage?
That's always a big thing. I've talked to a lot of growers up in that have historically grown corn, and they've always said, if it just turns off hot and dry, I'll just silage it, and a lot of them have started switching to milo, and, they question themselves on the sugarcane aphid year, but they just did that decision. If I get SCA and I get an infestation that's high enough, I'll just chop it.
Yeah.
And that is an option that's there is have it and have it available.
Why did they switch from corn to sorghum?
Because the input costs are lower. That amount of money you've spent from planting to chopping is typically just lower. And from a chopping standpoint, it is also lower as far as total tonnage and quality and stuff like that, but not that much. So they've kind of moved around those folks that want to have a ripcord, if you will, of I want to do grain, but if I can't do grain, I can chop it. Have kind of moved along. The folks that are true blue.
So it's not even the brown, like the forage sorghums. You're talking straight grain sorghums.
Yeah, just straight grain themselves.
They doing it on 15s or 30s?
A little bit of a mix, but I think a bulk majority of folks are more favored to 15s on that. But I mean they're trying to grow grain first and on that. So it's the thing I always tell growers on sorghum. Singulation is more important than what row spacing you are for sorghum. So I want to put a plant down where I want to put a plant down. So.
Well, by the way, you are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast, a cast of brilliant minds sitting around talking about Oklahoma agronomy, and we'll have more from the group coming up here in just a couple minutes. So stick around. Now, back in the old radio days, this is where we would call. We're going to pause for station identification. You're listening to whatever the sport was. Anyway, while we do take a quick break, I wanted to remind you that you also can join the conversation. You just send us an email at podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or you can send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. And also, you can see show notes and more information about the podcast than you could ever want to know. You'll find that at reddirtagronomy.com. Now, just bear in mind that the website is a work in progress, and we are populating it as the podcast grows. But you'll be able to find some information from this specific podcast on there, and kind of what we're looking at doing in the future podcasts as well. reddirtagronomy.com. And now that the guys have had an opportunity to get a quick drink of water, let's jump back into the conversation on the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And here we are, part 2 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast, and we have the brain trust here. We kind of talked about Plan A in the first half there, but those were all the crops that you want, and with the expected outcome that you're hoping for. But it's kind of worth looking at plan B? What if you don't get your sorghum that you were hoping for? What if you don't get the wheat that you were looking for in those crops? I mean, it is there is that option of always having, forage off of those crops too.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor it too much, but Josh, he made a couple comments about forage production.
Right.
And when we look at the landscape and what's happened over the last 18 months with the drought up in the northern plains, and now we're looking at the barrel of it, and cattle, you guys are willing to pay for hay to run their cattle, and whether you have cattle or not. And I mean, it's just a nerve-wracking deal. But when you look at your overall program, and you see all your neighbors with these cattle, and the pastures are going to be fairly dry coming out of this as well.
Right.
And we want to be able to maintain that herd, because if all the cows are sold off in the U.S., then the cattle market will fundamentally go up because supply and demand type stuff. And so whether you're thinking about, a multi-purpose or dual-purpose crop like milo or corn, where you can go out there and take that crop for silage or hay or whatever, even planting purposeful forage crops, I think it's not a bad idea to at least think about it as part of your diversification. The good thing about forage crops is you don't have a physiological point in the growing season where you must have moisture,
right,
like you do for grain crops. Grain crops, you have to have moisture during flowering and pollination and then grain fill to make that crop, whereas forage, you just need the total amount of water available to that crop is proportional to the biomass produced, which is your hay.
Well, and with that, you're going to have different qualities of forage, whatever, depending on when you do get your moisture. But, at the end of the day, you just need something for the livestock to eat with that too.
Well, and the good thing with a lot of our summer forages, if you will, like especially our forage sorghums and stuff like that, is that they're often planted so late in the year that we can have that indication of how that summer's going to go. We've already surpassed that breaking point, that wave crashing in mid-June, and we're sitting here going, okay, what am I going to do with that? And we can make those decisions from then, and maybe it's still not a point that I'm willing to put seed in the ground. As cheap as forage sorghum is, maybe I'm still not at the point where I'm willing to put that money in the ground to crank up that tractor and how much diesel I'm going to use plus how much seed I'm going to use and all that. I'm just not willing to do that. But like Jason said, it's one of the best, safest ways, maybe I'll say that, as to not get a blank in a year. And most of our growers around the state will need forage at some point in time, especially if we've blown through our hay storage this winter. Maybe just didn't have good wheat pasture. Maybe didn't get a whole lot of wheat. There's various ways. If you don't have a whole lot of hay storage, it's an option that has to be considered. The one failing point is that in the last couple of years, we've been at a shortage for seed, good quality seed in the state. So it's one of those things that if it's going to be part of your decision tree, it's worth looking into how much availability you can get on good quality seed right now.
And with different options in there too. One thing that I was taken aback by a few years ago, whenever we were doing an interview, I had never thought of oats. But you were talking about the benefits of planting oats as kind of a last ditch effort for anything to hold the soil together and maybe possibly something to feed.
Well, and right now I've heard a tremendous amount of folks that are going to be planting oats in the next 24 hours.
Right.
One, we got some rain on the forecast.
Yep.
And not just, hey, I didn't get wheat in. It's, hey, I have wheat in. It's grazed to the ground, so I'm just going to overseed oats on top of this. I'm going to either bale it or I'm going to graze it out anyway, so I don't care if there's oats in with my wheat or wheat in with my oats. I'm just going to get something out there. That way, hopefully, if we do get those March rains, I'm going to have a forage out there to like help string them along into our summer pastures come back around, hopefully, this year. So, yeah, who knows when this will come out, but yeah, oats would be a big option, especially with if we are going to end up getting a little bit more consistent rain, I've always been told Valentine's Day is the day you plant oats.
Yep.
The day after Valentine's Day, you should be out there sowing oats. So
sowing oats on Valentine's Day.
Probably not your best option.
Okay. I was wondering about the verbiage there. So whenever it comes to that, the oats, why haven't we heard of oats widespread leading up? Why haven't I heard of it? I mean, because I'm not.
I don't know, Dave. I did an interview a couple of years ago, so I've heard.
But you don't hear oats as an option for different options like that, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've actually had a good amount of spring oats go in. The biggest thing is if you've ever tried it or if you've ever had them in a cover crop mix or something like that, oats get a little bit too much growth on them in the fall, and the winter will just come out and snatch them.
Yeah.
But yeah, good spring planted oats are a very common thing. There's even some folks out in the eastern side of the state that take it to grain, and get good grain. We're not a big oat producing state,
right?
But good spring planted oats, whether your wheat pasture has died or we see it really big. And I think that the year we did the interview, we just didn't have a whole lot of wheat get in because we didn't get the moisture in October, November, and December.
And then it was we got all the moisture in the winter.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of questions on. I never planted wheat. Do I plant wheat now or do I plant oats now? And if forage is your main option, oats are starting to right now getting to be probably your best option for a forage if you want to go now, given that we get some good rains.
So with that. The spring planted oats is there a better part of the state for that? I mean, Oklahoma is a pretty diverse state when it comes to topography and different soil types and all of that. Is there a better part of the state that you're going to see benefits of spring planted oats?
As long as you get rain, I think they can grow in the east as well as they can grow in the west. The panhandle I'm not sure on because of how cool it still continues to stay.
Right.
If we get a nice warm spring, they'll probably do okay. Jason, have you ever heard a lot of guys out kind of in that far northwest ever go into that oat option?
I don't know, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. It's going to come out of the ground a little later. You may plant it a little later because, like I say, they warm up later. But it would be a good program.
And really, I think the deciding factor is what is your intent going into the summer months, because it's not a good option to just have like a 2-month layover between, hey, I'm going to be planting corn or sorghum. But if you're going to go out, if you had intended to maybe do a double crop or fallow out this summer, yeah, it's something growers should probably definitely consider. They just don't know if they're going to have enough forage come around in the spring to kind of go with it because they don't know. The ones that I've talked to now, this is they grazed it real heavy in the fall, thinking that they were going to get some overwinter rains to kind of perk that back up. They just haven't. So they're a little bit concerned about have I eaten out the growth point? Have they pulled enough of it out of the ground that I'm just really spotty? And so it's just I don't know if I'm going to have enough forage, so I'm going to put some more forage out there.
It's a good plan B.
It's yeah.
Okay. Well,
once again, you're still rolling the dice because we have a great chance for rain at the back end of this week.
Right.
But like Jason said, our next 60 days don't look great. So you still are going to need, just like the wheat needs.
Yeah.
You still are going to need some rain to move it along. And it's more money because you've potentially already spent the money on wheat.
Right. Well, and we've kind of seen an alteration of the rainy season in Oklahoma. I mean, there's years you can't get a combine in the field because it's raining in May and June, whereas we traditionally would have seen that a little bit earlier in the growing season. And that's just how it works in Oklahoma, I guess.
Yeah, and the distribution of rainfall in Oklahoma used to out in the Panhandle we would have what is called a monomodal rainfall pattern,
right?
Where the summer is the wettest period of the year. And then the winter, and even right now going into almost April, is still in your dry season. And your rainy season starts in May, runs through August. And then downstate, it's different.
Right.
Our rainy season historically starts in April and runs through June, and then you have dry period from mid to late July into August and September, and we start growing, or we start getting rains late September and October, and then it turns off.
Right.
And that's probably why after the Depression we grew wheat. So yeah, but you know, there's not a freaking normal rainfall or weather. It's exhausting. And you know, when I first came here, there was an agronomist, I won't name names, but he'd always talk about planting dates. You need to plant this day because of this and that. But and you know, you look at the average rainfall and temperature and blah, 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 and there's nothing average. I mean, yeah, there is an average because hell, I can calculate an average.
Yeah.
But it don't mean much as far as temperature and rainfall.
So the Farmer's Almanac is out the window when it comes to...
I don't know. I mean, I like talking, you know, I like talking to those guys down in OU that look at the climate and the weather. I mean, they're still forecasting, and it's hard to do, but, you know, they can give us a little better idea.
Not a lot of confidence, but they can give us an idea.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. And I just hope they're wrong with current forecasts, or at least, you know, it changes.
Your averages, I mean, we've been farming on the average forever. That's even what the academics give, because it's a safer number. As an academic, we look at the last 20 years and say, you know, the 95% time, if you plant at this date, you're going to be better than not.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have any precision in it. It doesn't look at that. And so, you know, I get angry at, I'll even say it, in-laws who still cut hay in southeast Oklahoma based on the calendar date, because over the last 30 years, that was the best time. And I'm looking at it, I was like, all right, everything's headed out. You've already lost 30% of your nutrition value because you're waiting to this calendar date instead of doing something more proactive. And that's what I do think our farmers have gotten a lot better by adjusting. And a lot of them already did. But that adjustments they're making because they have more flexibility. They're not just in a wheat cattle system anymore. They've got more flexibility, and they're able to adjust, flex from, okay, it's too dry to put corn in the ground, so I'm going to switch to soy or cotton. Or, you know, I missed my soybean window, I'm going to try to throw some sorghum out there, or this. And I mean, even the guys you two work with, the whole double crop corn, who would have thought Jason, when we started in 08 that we'd be doing double crop corn studies in Oklahoma?
It's crazy.
Well, and you know, I actually gave a lecture on double crop corn a week ago, and I had a student that's a son of a farmer out in eastern Oklahoma, and he's like, you know, I've told my dad for years I wanted to try this, and he goes, my dad thinks I'm crazy, and everybody at the coffee shop thinks he's crazy, but you know, you talk to some of the guys that do it, you know, barring a late freeze, it has the potential to be one of the most consistently yielding crops that we do, because it plays on the physiology of it goes through tasseling and all that in late September. And 9 years out of 10, we will rain in September and October. And so it plays on that. And the yield potential some years is not exponential. But some years it's, you know, 70, 80, 90 bushel corn, dry land corn, which, I mean, it's pretty good even for full season in some areas. So
if we bring in the reality, there's secondary markets with that double crop corn that are phenomenal in north central Oklahoma and northeast Oklahoma, which is waterfowl industry coming in with such big. And these guys that have those double crop cornfields, they pull in some pretty good money because those birds like that corn that's still out there, and it can. So I've known guys that have had effectively failures on their double crop corn, maybe because they couldn't get their combines low enough to pick up the corn heads or the corn ears, and they made pretty good money coming back on the waterfowl industry. So there's secondary value in something like that.
Well, and just and Brian, I think you're right. Just flexing your mind and saying, like, what am I doing, and is that right? And just questioning that, do we need to do things the way that we've always done it? And maybe that answer is yes. Maybe we found out that the answer is we were doing exactly what we needed to, but that's always just a great exercise to, you know, take a step back and make farm goals. What is my 5-year and 10-year farm goal? And are we reaching that with what we're doing right now?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Just kind of, changing the way that you think of things. You've done, Brian. You've done research into your top dress states.
Yeah.
And I mean the tradition was you go ahead and do an application at the beginning of whenever you plant or whenever. But you found that maybe this time of year that you get more bang for your buck.
Well, when we started, the tradition was it went down pre-plant. And it was a conversation, let's go 50-50 split. I remember that was big conversations like, okay, let's pull back pre and just go 50%.
Right.
And even as a couple of years ago, there will be people unnameless, like has already earlier gone, that would say, we got to front load. Same thing in a lot of crops, the historic is like we got to have it there. And in efforts to better understand the use of the sensors and the enriched strip, I looked at work thinking about, okay, how late could it wait? And the whole process for that is, okay, I've been telling folks if they put out an enriched strip, pull back on your pre-plant and your crop is going to go deficient. It will be yellow and it will be ugly. And I'd always say, don't let it be ugly for more than 30 days. After 30 days, you're going to lose yield. I had no data. That was nothing than wanting to cover my butt and thinking that all right, we can't go past that. I don't want to make recommendations. And so this work was, okay, let's quantify that. And it came out, and this is over 6 years, and we're actually going back into a lot of Bill Ron's work. So I've pulled from 2008. I've been pulling all of his data from 2008. I've been pulling his data from earlier and looking at his timing stuff. And the crop didn't need it pre-plant. And this is grain only. This isn't the grazing stuff. We got to have nitrogen for grazing, but grain only. When we did the research, it didn't need it until the spring. And so moving to the spring, and I'm talking all the nitrogen, put a starter with it, some 1846O, some 1152, get some starter, some in-furrow. And really, you didn't have to fertilize the crop until February, March, or even April. And if you wanted to look at it as a marketing point where you wanted to get the most yield and protein out of the crop, it was after joining, which is after holostem, and there was no rationale. And I didn't share the data for 2 years because I thought it was wrong. It took 4 years before I really understood it. And so what we've been talking about with a lot of breeders is we're trying to understand this, right? So the data shows that if I start fertilizing late February, early March, I'm maximizing yield. If I wait till late March or even into April, I start maximizing protein and yield. There's a point where those two converge.
Right.
So protein kind of holds. I don't gain a lot from changing from a February 30th fertilizing date to March 15th as far as yield goes.
Right.
But I do gain a lot of protein. So the difference between a February 30th and a March 15th might be a 0.5% protein.
Yeah.
Because we still start getting that swing. And so we started looking at this, and I think this does play into what's happening right now and the future of my research, is that we're really looking at, I've only done OGI varieties. I've only ran the dual purpose varieties. I've only had Bentley, double stop.
Right.
Those that are grazing grain. And so the question comes back is how much of that delaying is actually not overproducing tillers? And because I'll tell you, sitting in the combine, when I delay it to joining, the crop's shorter. I've got fewer heads. It looks like I have fewer heads. I have bigger heads. I have more spikelets, more berries per head, and I'm yielding more than the pre-plant. So we're looking now as how much of that is tiller management. And so we're going to do head counts and those things. But waiting right now, and what scares me with what we have right now, and I know this won't come out, is that everybody's fertilizing. I've talked to 5 guys in the last 24 hours that are going to fertilize right now. The problem is that if it rains an inch on Wednesday and then keeps raining, we're not in bad shape. But if it doesn't rain an inch on Wednesday and doesn't keep raining, what's going to be out there? We burn up now. Now we have a lot of nitrogen out there, and so I don't want to come back into that with the soybean. So if I go down and I've got all this nitrogen out there, I won't want a crop. So now I'm limiting what my follow-up crop is. I might not want to go soybean where I've already top-dressed a failed wheat crop heavily. Yeah. And so now I'm going to be looking at, okay, I'm only going to go sorghum. Or it might be too late to pull the corn. And so what am I limiting on that? And so there's a lot of guys. So it's split on what I've been seeing is that my preference is let's get some moisture in the ground to know that we're going to have something. Right. I know some people have too many acres and they just can't wait, and it's just one of those things. So if you can't wait, I'd much rather see go out with a short shot. So 20 to 40 pounds of nitrogen now. If you haven't done anything, if you got pre-plant out there, just walk away. Just put the freaking checkbook down. Stop. But if you don't have anything and you need, put 20 to 40 units down, and we've got time to make that secondary decision. Because really, if we only get a little rain now, we get that fertilizer in the ground, 20 to 40 units in the ground, and we stop raining, then we've got enough to make the short crop that lack of moisture is going to make. And so that's kind of where we're going is that give it a little bit. Let's get a little soil moisture in that fuel tank, and let's see what we've got before we start investing. Because our nitrogen price, we're looking at doing a nitrogen application with expensive inputs and not sure about the return on investment at this point in time.
Yeah. We've also talked about, are we going to fertilize the crop or are we going to fertilize the weeds?
Yeah. I mean, you got to pay for that herbicide too, don't you?
Well, and let's talk about herbicide, and then what that does to the soil quality over the years there.
As far as herbicides,
Yeah.
Well, the challenge is right now with the cost of the herbicides, the availability of the herbicides,
Right.
is I mean, from just a soil health standpoint, it's like how many guys are gonna go back to tillage. And during my, I've lived in Oklahoma. I grew up here. I left, came back. When I was a kid, a moldboard plow was very common.
Right.
Like I'm talking about when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And then through the 90s, we kind of put all those up, went with discs. And then, into the 2000s, we start getting into no-till. And so now we've got like 38% no-till was the last census. And, I talked to growers, and it's been good. I mean, you see what's happened in the United States and in the Southern Plains as far as like a change in agriculture since in the last 30 years been pretty substantial.
Right.
But when you have these herbicide costs that are so high, there's growers that are right there in that size, the farm size, where they can still manage, the smaller to mid-range farms, they can still cultivate their ground and get it all done. And then you've got the really large farmers that can't.
Right.
And then you've got the really small farmers that can. And there's everything in between. And so, but they're looking at their costs, and they're like, I can go out and sit on a tractor for free.
Right.
And I can keep my operation solvent. Or I can pay to have it sprayed, and it's not.
Right.
And so that's kind of the concern from a soil health standpoint. And then you have challenges with concerns about the safety of herbicides from a public perspective,
Right.
whether it's environmental or human health. And all these things are like a pressure on agriculture. My job is to maintain or at least improve the conservation of resources in Oklahoma.
Right.
And there's a big balancing act because we don't want sediment running down into the creeks, but we also don't want a bunch of chemicals either. And
Right.
and that's really the trade-off. And so we're just looking at a very interesting situation.
So you said it was in the 30s, 38% of land available in Oklahoma was no-till at the last time they checked.
Yeah, the last time they did a census, it was 38% of the cropland in Oklahoma is no-till. And what's really interesting, we just gave a talk about this back in December, but what's really interesting is most of those no-till acres actually came from what was prior to that conservation tillage, which would be any tillage practice leaving 30% or more residue on the soil surface.
Right.
And then we've lost some of our intensive tillage. The definitions of some of these things and how they were accomplished have changed, but about 38% is really conservation and no-till. And then all the while during that The last 40 years, we've lost like 1.7 million acres of cropland to grass.
Right.
And that's just planted grass. 500,000 acres of CRP, 800,000 acres to development. So our cropland acres are shrinking. So the overall potential for tillage is shrinking. But we may see an uptick in the amount of tillage on our cropland.
And that's just one of those unintended consequences of where we are with everything in the world right now.
Yeah. I mean, resistant weeds,
Yeah.
cost, the availability of chemistry for a variety of reasons. It's tough.
Well, so where do you think the place is in that whole system for things like what you would call the low impact tillage implements like sweep plows and VTs and stuff like that?
Well, and that I grew up on a farm that was blow sand, and so we run a lot of sweep plows because if we didn't, it would close the rows. If we had heavy tillage in the wrong time of the year, we would close the road with dirt, just blowing sand. And so I'm a big fan of sweeps. I work in the Panhandle, a lot of 5-foot plows or 20, 25-inch sweeps, because they're great tools because they undercut the crop and they kill the weeds. And that's really my biggest issue right now in conservation ag, no-till, is weed pressures. 30 years ago, you could torch the earth with Roundup, and now it'll kill the grass, and that's about it. And not even all the grass. We're working with tumblewind grass, it won't kill that. But you can undercut that soil, kill the weeds, and then still be left with the residue. And I talked to my predecessors, and they used to have stubble mulch jubilees and things like that back in the 70s because everyone was running listers and moldboard plows, and they were trying to get people to stop doing that and leave residue on the surface because they learned back in the 30s and 40s that if you left residue on the surface in the Panhandle, you could stop the Dust Bowl. That's what happened.
Yeah.
That along with putting a lot of that ground back into grass. But the chisel plow was the plow that saved the plains because it undercut stuff instead of flipping it over and burying it. And so it's a tool that's been around a long time, but it's a tool that should be reevaluated because you can undercut, leave the residue, and with modern planting equipment, especially if you're no-till, you can plant right through it, and it's a pretty good deal in my opinion.
So, like you said, one of the biggest things for herbicides is the cost, and there's still a cost to tilling. It's just a deferred cost.
Yeah.
And so, what is that of a deferred cost of moldboard plow or disc or sweep? I mean, where did all those kind of fit in, just based on maintenance, wear and tear on that 5-year basis?
Well, you've got a couple different things going on. If you're running, tillage equipment, you're not running as wide, you're not running as fast. So your labor costs are going to go up. And as an individual, you can forego that labor cost by just not paying yourself, right? So that's one cost that's dynamic, and how you manage that on your operation is up to you. I mean, you've got to feed your family. But a lot of farmers work in town too, and then you have a balance between, am I working in town to support my farming habit, or how that works. But you can keep it solvent with that situation. And then you have the deferred cost of maintenance on the tillage equipment, because I can run it this year and pray to God that I make a profit enough to replace the blades on it before they're completely worn out. And so you have those kind of costs that you can defer to future. In contrast to herbicide, I have to go and I have to pay for today before they put it. When they put it on. Does that answer your question?
Well, and speaking of answering your question, if anybody has a question that they'd like to present to the group, you can go to podcast at reddirtagronomy.com and submit your questions there, or you can just go to the website reddirtagronomy.com, or You can also ask questions via Twitter, and we will make sure that they get before the group. So this has been a really good chat between the three of you. As we kind of wrap up, are there any takeaways that you want to make sure that the listener has? Like, I guess we'll start with Josh.
Start with me. That's not very fair.
You're the youngest. Deal with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we covered a good amount. I know a lot of it focused on kind of the environmental conditions that we're dealing with now that could be very fluid in the future, or we could be just building on in the next several weeks. So, the biggest question and the biggest thing that I think was said today is just be able to be dynamic and be fluid with the operation, because the month of April could change everything.
Oh yeah.
And so, that's a big thing for me to take away is always have that to where you can kind of move and maneuver your maneuver.
If you get manure now, it's a good deal too.
You could probably get manure. That'd probably be a good option. But maneuver your operation based on kind of what we have in the next several weeks.
Mm-hmm. Jason?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm always nervous about drought and the onset of it because, when I started here in 2008, everything was looking pretty good, and then it just turned a crap show. And I really just don't want to live through that crap show again. But it's always in the back of my mind, and I think that's how most of our growers are. And if you don't have that back of your mind, then you could get dinked pretty good. But it could start raining, and everything turn out all right.
Well, even as you deem it during the crap show that was the drought, we had some pretty phenomenal summer crops, right? It was that the rains killed our wheat crop, but in some spots we cut the best sorghum I've ever cut during that time frame. And so go back, it's that one thing that most of the grains plates, the Great Plains producers, and I'm talking from Texas to central Canada, it don't matter. They're one of the most adaptive group. They have to be. It's not because they want to be. It's because they're forced to be, because the Great Plains is such a wonderful place to be farming in. But the adaptive nature and being able to pivot on a dime in this season could be pretty valuable. Might have really good ROI.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's Dr. Brian Arnell. You are the Precision Soil Nutrient Specialist.
No, but you're close.
What's your title?
Precision Nutrient Management.
Yeah.
You add words.
I
do.
It sounded the same to me.
It is.
I mean, I've interviewed you for over 13 years, and I think I've got it right once. And even then, I mean, I messed up that take, and then I missed it.
You got my last name right, though. It took
finally,
5 years. But
only 5 years. For the first 5, it was Brian Arnell. Arnell.
Yeah.
But it's pronounced Arnell. Yeah. And it was your wife that told me that.
Yeah, it was.
I'll never forget that.
Embarrassed.
She like stopped me at Lowe's, and she's like, Dave, by the way, it's Arnell. I was like, I'm so sorry. It's but yeah. And then, of course, Dr. Josh Lofton, cropping system specialist at Oklahoma State University.
I have a specialist at the end of mine.
Yeah. So Brian, you're not a specialist?
I am, but it's too many words.
Yeah.
It's not as many as mine.
Jason, what is yours?
So I'm the Soil and Water Conservation Management Extension Specialist.
Ooh.
That's what's on my job description anyway.
Man. And that job description just keeps getting longer. We hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and just as a quick reminder, if you would like to join in as well, drop us an email or a tweet. You can find that information at reddirtagronomy.com. For Dr. Brian Arnell, Dr. Jason Warren, Dr. Josh Lofton, and while I am not a doctor, I play one on a podcast, and my name is Dave Deacon. The proceeding is a copyrighted broadcast of Ag Now Media, LLC, 2022, and yes, all rights are reserved.